All right, welcome in everyone. We can see some people joining us. Hi, Brian, Derek, Francis, Jamie, Edward, Kate, Lucy, Libby. So great to see some familiar names. If you are just logging in, I'm going to ask you to find the chat box and send us a message and tell us where you're joining us from, where in the world you're joining us from today. We'll read out some of the answers and see who's in the space. Lucy's in Denver. I'm in Colorado myself. Hi, Lucy. Maryland, DC, Arlington, Seattle, Boston, San Diego. Oh, Ghana. That's wonderful. Minnesota, some more Marylands. Lots of Marylands. All right. Well, people will probably still be filtering in here, but in the mindfulness of time, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Izzy Martins. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at the Nebo company. I am excited to welcome you to the first in our webinar series, Leading a Culture of Belonging. This first session is titled, Is Your DEIB Strategy Set Up for Success? And I want to note that we have 3 more webinars in the series. So in just a moment, I'll drop a link to where you can sign up. So if you enjoyed the session today, please be sure to sign up for our future sessions. We have Leading Cultural Transformation coming up on February 20th, Standing Up an Effective DEI Council on March 12th, and then our final session, Leading a Culture of Belonging, which is kind of a culmination of all the sessions on April 9th. So without further ado, let me introduce our hosts today. We have Kate Ebner, CEO of the Nebo company. Kate is also a leadership coach and facilitator, co-founding director of the Institute for Transformational Leadership. And we have Rankine. Raven is a DEIB specialist at the Nebo company. She really works with clients across sectors to help stand up DEIB groups at their organization, and she's also a senior manager at the Nebo company. So Kate, I'm going to pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Izzy, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people showing up for today's program. I want to just tell you that today is a webinar, which means that unlike a Zoom meeting where everybody can talk, we have to really rely on the chat and the polls that we're going to be giving you. And so that's a little frustrating because we'd love to be hearing your voices, but I think we're still going to have a very engaging session today. I want to just say a little bit about the Nebo company. You know, Nebo, as many people know, is named after Lake Nebo, which is a hidden lake in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State. It's a place I went as a child and a place where I felt the kind of inner balance and peace that we refer to when we talk about Nebo today. We think of everyone having your Nebo, a place where you feel at peace with the world and a place where you're centered and balanced. And I think from a leadership perspective in a complex world, we're really helping leaders to find and regain that inner balance, even on a stressful day. So we believe in this concept of a lake within, and the gift of great leadership is actually developing the capacity to sort of visit the lake even when you can't be there. So the philosophy inspires our work, and our work, as you know, and we can move forward here, the work is to develop the human potential to lead and transform our future. And, you know, we are a leadership development and organization development company. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and we bring a wide range of services related to coaching and developing leaders, developing organizations, particularly with an emphasis on culture and developing strategic visioning and planning. And I know that Raven would like to tell you a bit more about the organizational resilience category that we're working from today.
Yes, so our organizational resilience category really stems from organizational development to culture change, mindfulness at work. We offer a variety of different things, women's leadership workshops, and facilitation of retreats. So really a wide variety there. I'll turn it back over to you, Kate, to do a quick introduction, and then I'll come back on.
Fantastic. So I'm Kate Ebner. I'm the CEO and founder and leadership coach and facilitator, as Izzy said. I started the Nebo company 20 years ago because I believed that the world needed great leaders and that we actually needed coaches and conveners who could be in support of leaders. We know that leadership can be a lonely job, and we wanted to bring coaches with real leadership experience into the world of work in support of real life leaders. And so we've been doing that now for some time. This is work I love to do and work that I do humbly and with a great deal of excitement with a wide group of now 100 coaches and facilitators who work with Nebo. My colleague Raven has been with us now for a while too. And Raven, would you like to say a few words about who you are?
Yeah, so thank you to those who are joining us today. I'm very excited, to share insights and best practices from our work with clients and the field in general. So a little bit about me. I've always been interested in helping organizations maximize their potential, which was really evident from my a class I took in college, organizational behavior. But that being said, my love for DEI and journey really started here at Nebo 7 years ago. I remember, Kate and I attended a conference that was focused on increasing diversity in the legal field. And I remember just turning over to Kate and saying, this is what I want to do, right? I want this to help create opportunities and inclusive workplaces for historically marginalized communities. And so fast forward years later, I've been doing just that and more. So I've worked with organizations to strengthen their culture and practices in efforts to foster a culture of belonging, helping them develop the confidence to move forward with their DEI priorities and the resiliency needed to face challenges as they, arise. My background in my education background is I have a business degree from Boston College, and then I received a diversity, equity, inclusion certificate from Georgetown. So this work is very near and dear to my heart. And so I really do appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. So with that being said, let's get started. So today there will be 3 major takeaways. Our first will focus on the 4 conditions that we have identified that is really needed to set a DEIB strategy up for success. Many of our clients come to us knowing that they want to invest in DEIB, or they're probably, facing multiple challenges, but may not know where to start. So today we'll be sharing how to identify your organization's starting point and an overview of DEIB options that Nebo provides to address a variety of needs. So I'm sure that we've all heard how important it is to have a diverse workplace and why these organizations outperform their peers. But what is not mentioned enough is that by nature, diversity creates conflict, right? When you have a group of people with different values, perspectives, experiences, it increases the chances of conflict and organizational effectiveness. Therefore, to really reap the benefits of having a diverse workplace, it is really imperative to have a comprehensive DEIB strategy in place. This will help ensure that employees feel valued, like they belong, that they're equipped with the proper skill sets needed to thrive in a diverse workforce, and that the right mechanisms and structures are in place to ensure that everyone is being treated fairly. And I'd also like to add, every organization is diverse, right? They all have employees with differences, whether it may be neurologically, behaviorally, their at-home structures. For some organizations, the differences may seem less evident, or there may be, an opportunity to have more dimensions of diversity. But that being said, all organizations are diverse, and therefore they need a DEIB strategy. So I'd love to share with you these statistics about why inclusive environments are good for business. A study done by McKinsey & Company revealed that workers in inclusive environments are 83% more engaged. Inclusive companies are more likely to attract the best talent and have higher rates of retention. Diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture new markets, and inclusive companies bring in 1.4 times more revenue. So these stats alone prove the business case for investing in DEIB. And I think, many organizations, they wonder if they should prioritize DEI initiatives, and if certain conversations belong in the workplace, right? So another study done by Benevity in 2023, which, by the way, the audience was very reflective of the US Census, revealed that 90% of respondents say they have personally benefited from DEIB initiatives at work. 92 of respondents agree companies have a responsibility to help employees become aware of their biases. 87 agree they would feel more loyal to a company with a proven track record of prioritizing DEI. And 78% agree that they would not consider working for a company that fails to commit significant resources to prioritizing DEI initiatives. So the numbers say it all. DEIB should continue to be a part of an organization's strategy to retain and attract employees. And I must say, the demand from our clients to engage in DEIB work has remained steady. In the fall, I attended the SHRM's Inclusion Conference, and the main message throughout was that DEIB is a business imperative with broader societal benefits. With people, spending most of their time at work, the workplace really needs to be a place where people feel safe and included. So, now we'll really get into the 4 conditions that will set an organization's strategy up for success. And what we've seen with our own clients is that when these conditions are not met, they tend to struggle in implementing their strategy, right? So therefore, we tend to go through these conditions. And if we identify that the conditions aren't met, we'll suggest that be a part of their initial strategy. So I'm curious, before we jump in, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what conditions you believe need to be in place in order to set a DEIB strategy up for success. So I'll give you a few moments to type in chat, but I would just love to hear from you. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the conditions you believe needs to be in place in order to set up a DEIB strategy for success? Oh, Sean, I love that. Hello. Leadership must be on board. Yep. Stacy, senior leadership buy-in and support of the strategy, commitment from top, willingness to start from top, trust, understanding the value, at least one respected leader sponsor, leadership commitment. I think that's what we're seeing here. Equitable processes. Yep. Commitment of time and resources of all, and openness. All right, so let's get started. The first condition, as we saw in chat, one of the major themes, leadership support, alignment, and unwavering commitment, right? The new leadership model of today really requires that fostering a culture of belonging is a core job requirement for leaders. It all starts at the top. They're the ones creating and supporting the vision for the organization's culture. They set the tone and should be modeling the behaviors. And when leaders demonstrate commitment, they foster accountability. So some questions to ask yourself to determine whether your organization meets these criteria, meets condition 1 is the first question. Are all members of the leadership team committed to creating a culture of belonging through their language, actions, behaviors, and priorities? Employees can tell when their leaders are not genuinely committed and DEIB initiatives are performative, right? And so if they feel that leaders aren't committed, it can contribute to a lack of trust, others not being committed, and so on. And something, when we conduct interviews as a part of an organizational assessment at Nebo and ask about their leaders' behaviors as it relates to DEIB, employees always provide an in-depth answer. So what does that mean? They are paying attention to the behaviors of their leaders. The second question you can pose is, do organizational leaders share and demonstrate a clear understanding of the organization's current state as it relates to DEIB? Each organization is unique, facing different challenges. Therefore, it's really important that leaders are making informed decisions from data and that they truly understand their organization's context. So, think about it, right? When you go get your annual checkup at the doctor, they recheck your vitals, your medical histories, and so on, just to ensure that they have an accurate picture of your health. This is the same thing applies for when you're developing a strategy for your organization. Next, members of the leadership team understand their role and how to enact them as it relates to DEIB. So, right, it is possible that when you're doing this assessment, it may vary for each member of the leadership team, right? It may not be clicking for all as how their role clearly connects or how they should be advancing DEIB initiatives. And as you can imagine, that disconnect can negatively impact the strategy and contribute to a lack of self-accountability. So I will say it's very imperative to have the conversation amongst leadership, even if it feels silly, right? Just to ensure that each member is aligned. We've experienced it many times where, members will say, I thought just saying I was committed was enough. I did not know I had to be an active participant, right? So having that conversation to be aligned is crucial. Lastly, are leaders equipped with the knowledge and skill set to lead a diverse workforce? This is something that we'll discuss further in our fourth webinar as to what skills are needed to lead a culture of belonging. But for this condition, do you have any questions? And feel free to pop these in chat as well. For condition 1, does it make sense? I mean, you all said yes, leadership support and alignment and unwavering commitment. That's great to see. All right, I'm going to move on. I don't see any questions yet. All right, so we would love to hear from you again. We're going to launch a quick poll. To what extent does your organization meet the criteria of condition 1? And if you're a consultant working with other organizations, how do you see to what extent do the organizations that you're working with meet this criteria? These answers won't be visible to anyone. We would just like to see, which criteria generally needs the most attention. And so you can answer it fully, somewhat, not at all. And I'll give you a couple seconds to fill out that poll.
Okay, looks like we have about half or so who have submitted their vote. So if you want to participate, we'll give you about 20 more seconds, pop in that answer into your poll, and then we'll all take a look. All right, closing up the poll in 5 seconds.
Thank you. And so looking at these results, so we have 35% saying fully. Kudos to you all. And then 62% saying somewhat, then 3% saying not at all. So thank you for sharing. It's really interesting to see where these results land. Kate, any thoughts or anything that you'd like to comment before we head to the next condition?
I think this is a really interesting poll result, and I think it tells us really that there's work to be done out there on this. And I actually think even the conversation among a leadership team about what does our commitment need to look like, how will people know and see our commitment, what is my role in that, and also what are the nuances of that, right? What are the things that actually would make a difference for people to know about or to be able to see? So I love condition 1. It really is a requisite, and it's something we test for before we say yes to working on diversity, equity, and inclusion projects. We want to make sure we have this level of support, or that there's a desire to get good at this.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on. Condition number 2, growth mindset. So, right, this work is an ongoing journey. Having a growth mindset really helps abandon the notion of perfection, and it leaves room for learning from failures and mistakes without shame. The one and done and fixed mindset would really cause an organization to be stagnant. So to assess this condition, you can pose these questions. 1, do colleagues have a clear understanding that DEIB is an ongoing learning journey, right? If yes, like I said, this can help ease the pressure and ditch that notion of perfection. which is helpful given that humans are ever evolving, right? If you think about like even recently about the new finding as it relates to neurodiversity and other forms of identity. Do people demonstrate the curiosity, courage, and willingness to learn about difference? Is the organizational infrastructure set up to assess the effectiveness of initiatives on an ongoing basis? An aha moment for one of our clients was that they were committed, and they had the growth mindset, but what they didn't have was a way of assessing progress. And that DEIB was not a regular agenda item, right? So they're like, this makes sense as to why, we lacked momentum in moving our priorities and initiative forward. And then lastly, do initiatives invite feedback and then evolve and mature in response to the feedback, right? That last part is critical, right? Collecting feedback is good, it is great, but what you do with it is most important. Any questions as it relates to condition number 2? All right, and we are going to now launch another poll to get a sense of condition number 2 and where your organization may be or the clients that you're working with. And so we'll give you a couple seconds to fill that out.
I think that's
Okay,
great.
about 10 seconds.
Yeah, while you're filling it out, what comes to my mind is the developing a culture that supports a growth mindset is a really great goal to have in your cultural focus work, in part because you really do want to create the conditions in which we're all learning together, and that people really can be at different stages in that learning process, and it's okay. And I think that contributes significantly to psychological safety and a sense that we're in this together, we're on this journey, we may be at different places, right? So this theme of growth mindset is, if it's present in your culture, that's a very good sign. If it's not, that might be actually an interesting thing to begin with.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. And I think, the results that came up is, 18% say fully and 76%, which is a majority, say somewhat. So that is really interesting. And like I said, we'll be sharing about what are some ways that you can help meet this condition and develop the capacity in this area. So thank you all. Let's move on. So for condition 3, we've identified that a clear articulation of the organization's mission, purpose, vision, and values is really imperative to setting up your organization's strategy for success, right? It serves as the connector and the unifier, giving employees a common purpose. It's what guides the organization's direction, allowing for more effective decision-making and just strengthening the overall culture. So these questions are pretty straightforward, right? The first 3 being if the mission, vision, values, and vision is clearly articulated. And then, outlining desired behaviors is crucial, especially in the face of conflict, because everyone will be able to refer back to those expectations. And that also ties in with the code of conduct and the employee's handbook reflecting the organization's values, right? If the organization states that inclusion and having a respectful workplace is a value, then it's so much easier to hold employees and leaders accountable, especially when the behavior is not in alignment. And so, Kate, you're such a visionary leader and have worked with countless organizations to create vision. Any words to add here about its importance?
Thank you, Raven. That was nice words. I think what stands out to me when I look at this list is, your mission is, for the sake of what? Why do we exist? What's our purpose? And most organizations have a mission statement or a purpose statement. Many actually need to refresh them, by the way, in the 2020s, post-pandemic. We're noticing that it's time to relook at missions. But so let's say you have a good, strong mission. Not everybody has a clear set of values, and we would recommend that you have probably 5-ish values that you organize around and that you really anchor your culture in. And of course, values live in behavior. So the question is, are these values people can actually see in action? Values are one of the best ways to strengthen culture. Again, links back to leadership, modeling those values. The vision is often missing. So people, what we see frequently is that organizations go straight into strategic planning without taking the time to say, what does our destination look like? Where do we want to be in 3 years? What does success look like in 5 years? And I think when you have that vision, the strategic planning is so much easier and makes so much more sense. So when you're running through this and really thinking about the relationship of one to another, these things taken together, plus of course the employee handbook with your policies, this is your ideology. And an organization's ideology is a very strong part of what coheres a group of people and creates the conditions for a culture to develop. So just really interesting to think about how well this is articulated in your organizations, and also, of course, whether the message that comes through is an inclusive one.
Thank you, Kate. And so any questions in regard to this condition number 3? And we will share these resources back with you after the webinar. All right, so let's launch poll number 3. To what extent does your organization meet the conditions of criteria 3 if your consultants, the ones that you're working with? And so I see Elizabeth typing in chat here. Yes, organizations should evolve and capture, ensuring and affirming that growth so the mission matures as the organization does. Makes much sense. That's right, Elizabeth. All right, giving you a couple more seconds to fill in here for this poll.
Yeah, it's great to see these answers coming in. The way that I think about this conversation in your organization could look like, why do we exist? What's the impact we're striving to make? What are the values we hold dear and important to us? And, where are we going? That's the vision question, and by when? And then who are we as that employee handbook and policies and all of that talk about sort of the type of community we are and what we expect of each other. What are the behavioral and work norms? So they all work together.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we're going to close out this poll and see the results. So we have 37% saying fully, 57% saying somewhat, and then 6% saying not at all. So for those in the somewhat area, I think that's a great indicator whether, you might want to think about whichever part you're missing is like, this is probably something we need to work on and implement into our strategy and incorporate into our strategy. So thank you. All right, let's move on. Condition number 4. Some of you had said it in chat. Dedicated resources, right? This will increase the organization's capacity to achieve priorities. We worked with a nonprofit client, and this condition was really hard for them, right? And so what I can say about this is that even with limited resources, there are ways to get creative to meet this condition. One way is breaking down the work into phases. Another way is identifying small wins to demonstrate positive momentum. But this condition is really where the rubber meets the road and demonstrates commitment. So for this one, the questions are, is there an annual DEIB budget? And so having a dedicated line item for this work will allow for effective planning. It is also important to ensure that this line item is not underinvested and that the budget is not consistently being reallocated to different things. Is there a dedicated role responsible for leading DEIB initiatives? You may also see that we state that DEIB should be woven into each person's job description. Both are critical, right? Achieving DEIB priorities is the role of everyone. The performance management system should reflect this as well. Having metrics to track performance as it relates to DEIB. But that dedicated role will really allow for someone to look org-wide and at that higher level, ensuring that DEIB priorities are moving forward. And they can also serve as a sounding board for others across the organization. And then, do employees have the time and are supported in helping achieve the organization's priorities as it relates to DEIB? So this is really a capacity question. And I think someone mentioned that as well in chat, right? The time and the resources. And then lastly, are there policies, practices, and resources in place to support DEIB priorities? We will talk about that one a little bit later when we discuss how to ensure DEIB is woven throughout in a future webinar. But any questions as it relates to this condition? Yes, thank you, Edward. So you said your question is, what does it mean that DEIB is woven into each person's job description? And so it may look different for each organization, but what we really say that is that each role should be responsible to achieving that. So what that may look like is, for instance, if you have the marketing department, like a marketing role, that they're producing content that is accessible to everyone, it's also that it's representative of different groups. And so that's one example of how that can look in that role. If they're thinking about like the finance department, they're responsible for ensuring that the resources are properly allocated, to ensure that the DEI priorities can move forward, and so on. Kate, anything to add there in regards to that question? Or
the question itself is really valuable. I think when we pause and ask ourselves, what is this person's job, this particular job, how does it connect, or how could a person in this particular role contribute to an inclusive culture? It's really interesting. Some people are in policy jobs, HR, for example, or even some of our finance, marketing roles. But I think others, it might actually be, I think about Nebo, where we're actually doing event planning. What kinds of spaces are we planning? What kinds of details are we including? What's the ethos we're creating, and how does that connect with our client and also create an inclusive environment? So what's wonderful about the question of how to weave the DEIB element into everyone's position is you'll find it. I think as you think about, you can think of it functionally, departmentally, you could think of it job by job, but it begins to be kind of a fun challenge. And I think you're going to quickly see that there's opportunity. We want to emphasize here this idea that an organization that's operating at a very high level of integration and commitment really is baking this perspective into everything. And I think this is part of that.
I think something that you said, Kate, really just stood out to me in as it related to an easy way to apply to each person's role is like, how are they fostering a culture of belonging for their colleagues, for their peers. So yeah, just that role, how are they contributing to the psychological safety, communicating effectively, to really create that welcoming environment. So that's another easy way as well to weave it in. But thank you for that question. So I would love to now take a poll for this last condition. How would you assess how your organization meets this criteria?
Yeah,
Okay.
about 10.
Yeah, this one shows some opportunity for everyone, including the ones who are finding fully is consistently their answer. This is a I think there's a lot of creative ground here. And, we're suggesting really assessing these conditions. And that assessment, I want to shift our energy from like a negative diagnostic mood to more like a creative, what are the opportunities kind of a frame. And I think in that, if we go back one slide for 1 second, Raven, and just look at those again, it's really interesting to think about how this works. We're often seeing that our clients will make a declaration, this really matters to us, and then they'll begin to move down the road to actually advance the initiatives that will add up to a more inclusive culture, but they may not actually stop and ask what kind of resources are needed to sustain this. And I think if you don't do that, it can feel a little bit like a one-off or an episodic commitment versus a sustained commitment. And so, as we think about this, think about how do we put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, but also it doesn't have to be huge. And I think this is something that I personally have learned a lot about in recent years is steady progress counts for a lot over time, whereas big bursts and then falling back make people feel like you were committed and now it went away, right? And now you're not committed, right? So it's actually interesting to start where you are and really build in this area.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. And so, as Kate mentioned, 85% is coming out in that somewhat area. And so there's opportunity, to think about how to meet this criteria and get creative. So in summary, these are the 4 conditions that really set an organization's DEIB strategy up for success, and like we mentioned, if, when you're doing that little quick self-assessment and these conditions were not met, that's a great indicator where your starting place may be. And so now I'll turn it over to Kate, who will share a little bit more about how Nebo can help your organization's strategy thrive and the different solutions that there are as it relates to these 4 conditions and in general. Thank you. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Raven. So, one of the things that I think really motivated us to bring this webinar series forward was this question, how can we help? And as we take in the various requests that come our way related to culture in particular, wanted to share a little bit about how we're thinking about this and what we're looking for or what we're looking at as we assess finding the starting point. And that phrase, finding the starting point, is kind of a Nebo phrase. We use it a lot. Like, you could do a million things, right? But where do you begin? What's the logical and most practical first step? We don't want to start in the wrong place and have the investment that you make actually not lead to the kinds of outcomes and sustained progress you're looking for. So, I think those 4 conditions give you a real sense of what we're going to be exploring with you. And then if you were to want to move forward with us, if you can go back 1 second, we begin with discovery, and we want to understand what's already present and when we look at your organization, how do your employees feel about it? What are they experiencing? What do your materials look like? Your website, the way you might use recruiting materials for new hires. Like, what's the message coming through? And is there anything that you may not realize is either missing or perhaps underemphasized or overemphasized in that process? So we're going to do some discovery work. We will do focus groups. We'll do interviews. Coming back from that, we're going to say, here's what we've learned, and here's what we think are your greatest opportunities. We may also conduct a survey of some kind using a number of the great tools that are out there to help do cultural assessments. And we will link the findings from that survey to the findings of the interview or focus group or literature reviews that we'll do. Leading across cultures is really about bringing programming that helps everybody learn. And I think, Raven, you said back in the beginning that people really are benefiting from diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment from employers. It's actually, people feel like they're learning and growing through that. We try to be very careful that we don't automatically start with programming, because if we don't have an understanding of where the system is, the programming could feel like a Band-Aid to employees. And so we really want to make sure the programs we bring are linked to what we learned in the discovery process. And then strengthening systems and culture is really about thinking about how the whole thing works. You know, how is the leadership team working? How is, if you might have a diversity, equity, and inclusion council, or you might have DEI leader, you might have a complex organizational structure where there are microcultures within the larger culture. So we're going to be helping you think strategically about how you're leaning into some of the anchors. So for example, values, how are values showing up across the whole system? So those are the three lenses through which we will look as we're helping you see your opportunities. Yes, so we talked a little bit about this already. Our engagements begin with discovery. And, you know, I think that we've learned over the years, particularly most recent years, that this is probably the single best starting point for almost every organization. We want to get that full picture, and we want to be able to play back for you and show you what we see or what we've heard. And I think, you know, our processes will protect the confidentiality of those who participate and give you sort of a thematic look at things. We are also really curious about what, to the extent to which your concept of where you are matches or doesn't match with what your employees or perhaps what we see in some of those materials we're looking at. So our process typically will take 2 to 4 months from start to presentations of findings and recommendations. And by the time we're presenting our findings and recommendations, we're really in a great place to have some fascinating and useful conversations with you about not only what we found, but you know, what it means to you and how what we're finding is resonating or perhaps surprising, and what to do with that. Yes, so we like to think about we've decided over time that a good way of thinking about our findings is to organize them in a manner similar to one of our favorite surveys is the Spectra survey, and they actually use these criteria. So do we. So what are our findings in terms of culture? What are the organizational norms and beliefs? What do employees experience? What do new employees experience as they come in? What are some of those unspoken rules that may be governing your culture and holding you back? So we look at culture. We might look at the values piece here as well. We look at management and leadership, how management sees itself and how it's seen by employees in terms of diversity and inclusion and overall effectiveness, right? So management and leadership is its own category. And again, we sometimes see micro cultures emerge and have some nuanced insights about different divisions, for example, or different pockets of an organization. Policies, practices, and procedures. There's almost always opportunity here. When we look at policies, practices, and procedures, often we're able to help you put your finger on where you have the most opportunity to actually take things that already exist. So maybe you've already got a great mission, vision, values, but your handbook doesn't actually reflect some of the statements that you're making on the website, or, you know, there's an opportunity to really think about how the procedures you put in place really are equitable, and the policies and practices are experienced by employees from a wide range. Sometimes the value of this particular category is to identify the opportunities and then really select the places where you think it would make the most difference. You may or may not choose to change your policy, but the discussion itself will be valuable. So these 3 categories enable us to actually help you work systemically to change to improve the culture that you have versus to kind of drop in and out in a way that may be momentarily satisfying, but won't give you the kind of systemic change that you're looking for. Okay, so we've talked about this already, really, but you know, just to give you a little bit more detail, from a qualitative perspective, when we're doing discovery, we're looking at policies, procedures, practices. We would also look at things like your communications, your recruiting materials, your messaging, your website, the photography and imagery that you use. We're going to take a sort of a holistic look at how you're presenting. We're also, what are we looking for? We're looking for the values and attitudes that are conveyed, the evidence of, or the way in which a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion is showing up. Who's your audience? Like, can we tell as we read your stuff who you're talking to? And does that unintentionally send a message that you do or don't want? Accessibility of language. Who is the language comfortable for? Who is it going to be best understood and appreciated by? Are things written in a clear, succinct way? Tone and content. And again, like this isn't glamorous work, this discovery. But it's done well and done thoroughly. It can really shift the tone in your organization. Anything, Raven, to add there?
Okay, you said it all.
Okay, good. So what does it look like when we're doing the work? Interviews, focus groups. We will work with our clients to identify who to interview. That actually is a really important consideration, sort of who to interview and how do we present that. Often we'll do interviews to get started and to learn about your system. And then we'll do some kind of a survey or a broader inclusive outreach. And then based on survey findings, we might do focus groups to sort of go deeper into the things that emerge from the survey process. And here's a great list of the kinds of things that we're looking for and that we learn about through this process. I think what's great about the discovery process is by the time we finish it, we have a real understanding of what your strategy should look like and which things would give you the most benefit.
Yeah. Something I'd like to add here, I think, interviews and focus groups are really a great way to help gain the buy-in and signal something new, especially if, you feel that there may be a lack of trust in your organization. It's a great way for them to feel heard and share their thoughts in a confidential way and just like get it out. So I think that's something that we always like to include in the process, just to allow for that if there are any people that feel like they just like to get things out as well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so here are we won't dwell here, but we want to point out that there are a number of assessment tools and approaches, and so part of your choices as an employer are to sort of select the tool or the combination of tools that are going to give you the most benefit. That's something we would help you with, and we're going to help you choose something, or if you've already been using something, we might review what you already have and incorporate what you've already learned into the work that we're doing. So that's another way we sometimes go.
Yeah. And we also would typically, we can start with that culture and experience employee survey coupled with the interviews and focus group. And then what the interviews, what the findings may reveal is like, okay, we need to take a deeper, we will recommend you take a deeper dive in the pay equity, recruitment, and diversity intelligence. And so that may be a part of the recommendation. So you don't necessarily have to start with those surveys in mind at the outset.
Yes. And I think an interesting example, Raven, that comes to my mind is we have a client that's really committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion and creating a wonderful culture. But when their employees go out and work for the customer of their organization, they experience a great deal of bias in their customer organizations. And so since their employees are often out at the customer, no matter what's happening back at the company, there's another experience being had. And those are sometimes the kinds of nuanced findings that we have that really help us think strategically with you about what would help. So the Spectra survey, which our friend and colleagues, Sandra Martinez, has brought this to us and often does this work with us. But we love the Spectra scale. This is when you get the results of your Spectra survey for your culture, it's going to place you somewhere on this trajectory. Are you at avoid, comply, adopt, integrate, or transform? And it's going to show you what the ground is ahead of you, what the real opportunities are depending on where you land. We see a lot of companies that are complying, but haven't really fully brought this ethos into their culture. We see a lot who are adopting. They're in the process of adopting, but they haven't really made it an integrated experience yet for employees. We see some who are integrating. We almost never see organizations that have achieved the transform level. And I would say that's the level where it really is woven through and baked into the entire culture. And I think that that's the real opportunity that we all have, is to actually consider what it would look like and feel like to be employed by a company that's in that transformation stage. And so that's what we're going to return to when we come back next month. We're going to be talking about what it could look like and what it might feel like for employees to be part of a transformed culture, and what would it take for you to lead your organization in a cultural transformation.
Thank you. Any questions from our participants? We are so grateful for you to have joined us today, providing your insights and your questions.
Thank you for your comments. And, we'd love to hear your stories as well. Please let us know. How fun to see little hearts floating up. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. And we'll see you, we hope, on February 20th. And, I'm hoping as you're leaving, I'm sure Raven and I are both hoping that your thoughts are perking about both how do we assess, how do we talk about, where do we find our opportunities? So thank you for joining us today.